My wife would say that Monaghan people never explain a story fully. So this story is one that was collected by a school child as part of the Irish Folklore Commission Schools collection back in 1937. The lady who told the child this story was a lady called Anne Connolly, and she said she was 5 years old when the events in the story took place. So that means this happened sometime in the 1860s or the 1870s. St. Peter's Church in Laragh, affectionately known to generations of Monaghan people as the Tin Church, is said to have been built by a husband for his wife. The husband in question, James McCarron, he was a local mill owner here, and he must have been deeply in love with his wife if he built her a church like this. And he also must have had deep pockets. Now, if he was a mill owner, he definitely did, because there were a lot of mills in this area. Monaghan in the 1700s and 1800s was renowned for flax growing, and flax was grown and processed in mills all around the county. And not too far away from here, over on the edge of Castleblaney in the townland of Corrinshigo, there was a farmer, and he was growing flax for market. He had 3 acres of flax that needed to be pulled. And on his farm, at the top of a hill, there was a fairy fort, Corrinshigo Fairy Fort. And then he had the fields, and then he had Corrinshigo Lake at the bottom of his fields. Now, if a farmer had flax to be pulled, there would be a lot of young men and young women willing to pull it at the prospect of a dance at the end of the day's pulling. And there definitely was going to be a dance after this day. So about 40 young people had gathered up to pull flax in the field in Corrinshigo. Now, to feed flax pullers, that's a big job. So the woman of the house, she had to prepare potatoes for the dinner. It was the 1870s, after all, when this story happened. She was preparing potatoes. They were mashed, they were turned out on a table in big bowls, and a hole would be made in the mashed potatoes, and a half pound of butter put into that hole, and the butter would melt, and that's what the flax pullers were going to have for their lunch, along with oaten bread and a cup of sweet milk. Now, to prepare the dinner, the lady of the house had a couple of neighbours in. They were very, very busy in the kitchen. She knew the workers would come in from the fields at 12 o'clock because that's when they would hear the bell in the local church. So she had to be ready and have the meal on the table. But around 11:30, when the kitchen was a hive of activity, they espied a little old lady coming down the boreen. And this little old lady was wearing a black skirt. She had an apron with patch pockets. She had a black shawl, a red kerchief on her head, and she was carrying a stick. And beneath her shawl, she had a bag, about the size of a £1/4 paper bag. She came to the kitchen door and she knocked. And she held out the bag and she asked for some oaten meal. Now, the woman of the house, she was very, very busy, and she said, we're too busy. We don't have the time to do it now because the oaten meal is in the loft out in the barn. I don't have time to go climbing up there. Come back after the dinner and we'll get you oaten meal. Well, that little lady, she turned on her heel and off she went. Now, when someone turns on their heel in our part of the world, it means they are not impressed with you at all. She turned on her heel and she went up the hill towards the fairy fort in Corrinshigo. She was only gone from sight when a blast of wind came out of the fort, and it blew through the farmland. It blew flax and bands and beads through the hedges and through the neighbouring fields, scattered them everywhere, but it lifted the finest looking young girl in the boon of flax pullers, a young girl of 18. It lifted her right into the air and flung her into the centre of Corrinshigo Lake. As the young woman hit the lake, there was a splash, and the waves went out and out and out as she went down and down and down, until the lake became still, still as a mirror. The workers in the fields then gathered themselves and they realised what had happened. They rushed to the shore. They got chains, they got ropes, they got anything they could drag the lake with. They put out curraghs, tubs, anything that would float, and out they went, and they dragged the lake and dragged the lake, but there was no trace of the young woman at all. And you can imagine the lamentation in the house when it turned out that she was the daughter of the woman of the house who had refused the old lady the oatmeal. Well, there was no sign of the young woman all the next day or the day after, and they were getting ready for a funeral because there was nothing else to do. When a man in the locality, an old man, said that because the problem had started in the fairy fort, maybe they should take a bag of oatmeal and the woman of the house leave it up outside the fort and see what might happen. So that's what she did. She took a bag of oatmeal, she went up to the fort, and she left it outside. There came another blast of air from the fort, and the workers in the fields were surprised to see a man come riding down the hill on a grey steed, and him wearing a royal cloak and crusted with jewels, and he rode his steed to the edge of the lake, and then he gave it a dig with his feet, and the horse jumped and landed in the middle of the lake where the young lady had landed before. The water splashed out and the waves went out and out and out as the horse and the rider went down and down and down. And then the lake became still like the glass of a mirror once again. After about a minute or two, the water erupted and rider and horse landed back on the shore of the lake, this time with the young lady seated behind them. The rider set the young lady down in the field and he galloped his horse back up to Corrinshigo fort. The people who were in the field, they said that the man on the horse, he looked so regal, so royal, with his rich cloak and his jewels, that he must have been the king of the Corrinshigo fairies. And that's what they called him from that day onwards. Now you can imagine the rejoicing in the house to have the young lady home safe and sound. And if anyone ever asked that young lady where she had spent the 2 days that she was away from home, all that she would ever say was she had spent them in a lively house.